This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Teachers Talk Radio. It is Monday, 23rd October, and you're listening to the Monday Morning Break with me, Kuttig. Today, we'll be talking about personal language learning styles, English for creative professionals, and the difference between coaching and language teaching.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello again, everybody, and here we are. It is a Monday, and I hope you are having a good Monday wherever you are. I'm a bit under the weather, so I'm sounding a bit hoarse, but here I am, and today we have a very exciting guest. I believe she's a very exciting guest because we are going to be talking about personal language learning styles. Now, you know, the way different people have different styles, some people are morning people. Some people are totally not morning persons. They prefer to work at night. And it seems that with language learning, we all learn languages differently. We have a style, and I have somebody here who is going to be talking to us about what this means and how this affects how we learn language. Sarah, are you there yet? Sarah, say something.
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. You're a
Wonderful.
little faint. I hope you're on your headphones, on your mic. You're a little bit faint, but it's really great to have you here on this lovely Monday. Sarah, before we begin with anything at all, tell us who you are, how you got into teaching English as a foreign language.
I will. Hey, so yeah, I'm using my headphones. It might be that the sound is better without, actually, so let me know if you want me to change it. But I'll start with my introduction, and I hope everybody can hear me okay. So, as many of us, I became an English teacher not because I wanted to, but because I sort of stumbled into it. I studied English literature and linguistics, but I never ever actually wanted to be a teacher, and just started teaching as a side job. And really took to it. I really enjoyed it. And so I worked for about 8 years at a private language school, teaching a lot of different sort of business English settings, general English settings, and eventually got my Cambridge Delta. And then eventually decided to strike out on my own and become self-employed as a language coach.
Okay. So just like very many other teachers of EFL that I know who work with adults, do you find, I mean, you're one of the few people I know who's got a degree in English language and linguistics. Do you find that your degree has equipped you better to teach English to adults, to teach the English language to adults?
I don't think the degree is necessary. I mean, definitely not the academic degree of linguistics, but it is helpful in, sharpening the way that we look at language or we think about language. For example, like a lot of our learners come to us with a very normative view on languages, right? Like they think there's good English and there's bad English, and for them, notions of correctness are very important. And for me, when I was studying linguistics, I really learned to love the variety and the many, many different forms that languages take, and especially also the English language, which has so many different varieties in the world. And from a linguistic standpoint, you really learn to cultivate this curiosity and openness. And I think that really helps in teaching practice, and then also being able to impart the same sort of curiosity in language maybe to our learners and help them form a more positive view maybe of their own accents or the variety of English that they are learning or speaking.
That's really interesting what you say there, Sarah, because, I work with young people who are training, right? They're training to be teachers. They're going to go into public schools here in Germany and teach English as a second language, as a foreign language. And many of them do question why they're doing all these courses. They have a very comprehensive, how would you say, a very comprehensive timetable schedule of work that they have to do, covering everything from linguistics, history of the English language, applied linguistics, things like social linguistics. They cover pedagogy and then various aspects of literature. And when I think about it, a lot of the literature that my students are doing is not being covered that much in school anymore. So they question that, right? So I'm still looking for the answer to give them. I like what you say about the curiosity, because I myself did not plan on becoming an English teacher like many. You said it at the beginning. We all just kind of stumbled into it. And then I discovered I was good at it. But I found that my own degree in linguistics and English linguistics doesn't necessarily give me the input into the output that I give my students, but it has given me, like you said, that curiosity and maybe the
Yes, and I
critical
think
thinking
also
skills.
the critical thinking skills, the curiosity, definitely, but also, I mean, the toolkit. I mean, we do learn. So I remember also like studying alongside a lot of students who were training to be teachers, and a lot of them really resented these sort of, deep theoretical linguistics courses that they had to take, or the courses in literature that were so very, very specific. I mean, like, are you really going to need all of this knowledge about, I don't know, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley when you're in an English classroom later on in your career? But I think each of the courses, they help us learn how to study the subject that we're studying, how to learn language, how to take things apart, and then eventually also how to teach them. And I think that is, along with the curiosity, as you say, and the critical thinking skills, is
And
very, very valuable.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And together with that curiosity, Sarah, have you yourself learned any other language other than English as a foreign language? Any other language at all?
Yeah, definitely. I had French in school, and after school, I never really had any very particular reason to learn to really speak French, which is why it's not my French is not stellar. Though I'm always surprised actually at how much there still is. For example, I was in Belgium a few weeks ago, and then suddenly all of this French came out of me that I didn't even realize was still there. So it must have been hiding somewhere. Then I took a little bit of Spanish. However, that was gobbled up by the Italian that I then learned, and that's been my language learning project for the past few years. I've been learning Italian, which I've now managed to get to like a sort of B2 level, which is really, really nice, because I'm now with my Italian sort of getting into the level that my learners have when they start with me. So I work with upper intermediate to advanced learners, and for me, and I think you'll agree, Kuttig, I'd be interested to hear. I think it's very important that we, as language teachers, we know what that feels like, right? Like, especially with my upper intermediate and advanced learners, this feeling of being able to follow everything around you, like understand even complex conversations and discourse, but having what you are actually actively able to say and produce being so much more limited, right? And that's what where I'm at the moment with my Italian is that gap of passive and active. I can really feel that, and I can really. So for me, it was a project learning Italian, like to be able to reconnect with that feeling of maybe frustration that a lot of our learners have at this level.
That's really interesting. It's similar to the conversation we had on WhatsApp not too long ago, where you said something and it was exactly what I was thinking at the same time. Would you say then that is because of having learned another language other than English and other than our first language that makes us good language teachers? what I'm trying to say with this is, would you recommend that if anybody were to teach English as a foreign language or any language, that they need to first be a learner in order to understand and to feel the pain, so to speak?
Yes, again, I wouldn't say it's 100% necessary, but I would really highly recommend everybody. I mean, I've met and seen a few teachers, maybe my old colleagues from the language school, where, yeah, there are good teachers who only speak English and never made much of an effort to learn another language, even if they live in another country, um,
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of, glide by, surf by, get by on their English. But I do think it makes us better teachers, and I think it also helps put our learners at ease. And I think this is really, really important. It was, again, one of the main reasons that I decided to work on my Italian, because I have a lot of Italian friends, and I
Mm-hmm.
was always speaking English with them, and they were constantly apologizing for their bad English. And then I thought, like, okay, how about I'm there apologizing for my bad Italian, like just to see what that does. And I do find that, yeah, it's it's quite empowering also for learners, and very inspiring when they see that we are learners, right? Like when they see that we are always working on something, whether it's getting another qualification in English, or working on something completely different. I know that, for example, with the pandemic, one of my sort of pet projects, just because I needed something to do, was I was trying to learn handstands, and it was a very difficult learning journey. But like, I remember having some useful conversations with learners around that time, and like they were able to sort of, I think, get something out of me just even sharing that I was working on handstands. I mean, it's like, I think it's important, like, to cultivate a sense of lifelong learning. Learning is
Mm-hmm.
positive, learning is great, learning is inspiring, and we're not learning because we have a deficit. We're not learning because we're bad at something, but because we're learning because we want to get better at things, and because it's fun and it's human. So I think it definitely helps when learners see us as language learners as well.
I totally agree with you there. I do see that with my own learners, when I'm in the classroom going through the English grammar, or I teach, classroom language to
Mm-hmm.
trainee teachers. And when I say something in German, just to exemplify or illustrate something, and I say to them, now don't mind me and my articles, I've never got them, but I'm still learning. And they giggle to themselves, and I tell them, and yeah, I'm still taking my German class, and I'm at B2, and I share with them a lot of the time the learning dip and rise. Have you heard about that
Mm-hmm.
activity,
Mm-hmm.
Sarah? I read it
Um,
in a book on teaching language critically or something like that, and
the
it was
learning dip and rise, did you
the
say?
learning dip and rise.
Mm-hmm.
It is an activity that you could do, should do at the beginning of any class, of any course, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do is you draw, like a bell curve, but the upside down one. So, where you
Mm-hmm.
start at the top and then you dip. So that's what it's called, the learning dip and rise. So if you imagine that
Mm-hmm.
you're at a certain point and you go straight for a while, and then you go down and you're kind of in that valley for a while. So it's not a sharp point at the end, but it's kind of rounded, and you go up slowly, but your rise is really, really slow, and then it plateaus out again. That's basically called the learning dip and rise. And it's supposed
Ah.
to illustrate for you that at the beginning of any course, you're enthusiastic, you're ready to learn, and maybe you've got a good momentum the first couple of weeks. And then at a certain point where, say, if you were a university student, or if you were in employment and you're taking the language course or any other course really alongside your day-to-day work and lives, that at some point something's got to give, right? So these,
Mm.
the amount of homework that you've got to do, or the self-study that you're doing, it starts to dip. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe your
Definitely.
motivation will dip too, and your interest. And the important thing to recognize is that when you get into this dip, you're there possibly for a while, because you don't come out. It's not like whoosh, I
Mm.
fall in and I'm back out again.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, in there, and you're in this valley for a while. And as I say to my students, and you see, if you look at that upside down bell curve, the rise, it's really, really
Mm-hmm.
slow. right? It's not a regular rise of X% every week, but it's steep, it's hard going. And then you come back up again, and that's called the learning dip and rise. And that's really the reality of it. I mean, I've had that with my German classes. I've had that when I did Swedish during the pandemic. I mean, you did handstands, I did Swedish. I'm not sure which one is more useful for,
Well,
for us
I didn't
here.
succeed. How about you?
Well, you see, at least for me with the Swedish, I can at least say that I'm A1 on the Common European Framework. I'm not sure where you would put your handstand, but we're going to go into the next segment. And in the next segment, I'd like to talk about personal language learning style. Okay, so just give me a second. We're going to think about personal language learning styles.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Are you looking for lesson planning materials to kickstart the new term? We've got you covered. The Day is a global online resource that turns the news into lessons. We're offering listeners a free resource on Andrew Tate that you can find on thedaynews.co/Tate. Inspire personal development and critical thinking for your students by downloading the Tate Debate today and feel more confident addressing sensitive topics with your class. Visit thedaynews.co/Tate to find out more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The Guardian reports on AQA plans to have pupils complete parts of some exams digitally in 2026. The announcement from England's biggest exam board means exams could begin to look very different, as it says it will begin testing GCSE students on laptops for a small number of courses from next year. Parts of GCSE Italian and GCSE Polish by 2026, with other subjects, potentially English, likely to be included by 2030. The exam board said technology and change are two constants in education, and that moving to digital exams is the next step. According to the Guardian report, pupils will still be supervised in an exam room and will be offline, so they will not be able to access search engines or artificial intelligence tools. Some head teachers have welcomed the move, with Askell describing it as encouraging, as reliance on pen and paper was outdated, but others have been less convinced. Melissa Prunty, chair of the National Handwriting Association, made the link between handwriting, reading and spelling, particularly at ages between 4 and 6. She also said that the key to writing, either by hand or typing, was speed and fluency, and pointed out that it's not something that you can just roll out and think it's inclusive. You have to teach typing and it needs practice. Since the announcement, professionals and researchers, as well as teachers, have continued the debate on social media. Secondary school performance data for England has been in the headlines, with the TES magazine presenting analysis of the results after a 3-year pandemic hiatus. The article highlights a variety of trends and points to consider, but also warns against making basic comparisons between schools, as many face ongoing disruptions post-COVID. The key points include a widening of the disadvantage gap, now at its widest since 2011. Unions, school leaders and educational researchers all expressed dismay at this and called on government and prospective governments to make this a core focus moving forward. EBAC entries have stagnated in the latest figures. The Department for Education has set a target of students entering the EBAC subjects at 75% for 2024 and 90% in 2027. The new data shows that current figures are at 39.3%, with languages continuing to be the main stumbling block. Regional differences also remain. The North East has the lowest average Progress 8 score and Outer London has the highest. This North-South gap has increased since the pandemic. However, some more detailed analysis of like-for-like schools in the North and South suggests comparable outcomes when other factors such as prior attainment are taken into consideration. There was a difference in progress for boys and girls, with girls achieving an average of 1/10 of a grade more than expected. Attainment 8 also dropped as a result of Ofqual's approach to returning exams to normal following COVID. Full details of the TES analysis can be found online. The Guardian also carried a report on changes to how poor behaviour will be responded to in the state of California in the United States. At least 25 states and the District of Columbia allow schools to suspend pupils for willful defiance. But California has become the first state to ban such suspensions for all students. The definition of willful defiance has been criticised by US education researchers as being overly broad, and they have also made links to the use of suspensions being disproportionate in some ethnic groups. The article prompted debate on X, formerly known as Twitter, amongst many in education, although the impact of California's discussions and decisions will only be revealed over time. Finally, the BBC reports that blue shirts and chinos have been banned by Cardiff University Students' Union due to dangerous behaviour from some students. Any people wearing the outfit, typically associated with some sports clubs, will be refused entry to its Wednesday night club night. The Student Union has said the measure is temporary and in response to the behaviour of some male students earlier this month. Since the ban, a marked improvement in behaviour has been seen. The ban does not apply to any buildings other than the Students' Union, which acts independently of the university. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
And here we are back again. So, tell me, Sarah, what do you mean by personal language learning style? Is it like being a morning person or a night person or liking a particular style of music?
That's what could be involved in it. I'd like to start with what it's not, and that's if some colleagues are listening and thinking that this is about learning styles. It's not. So learning styles, most of you will know, is a discounted theory where we have some visual learners and we have auditory learners and we have kinesthetic learners, and this is a theory that was popular for a while and that a lot of people still seem to think it's true, even though it's been widely discounted. So that's what it's not about. I'm just borrowing part of the name. No, what I mean by personal language learning style is basically, what do you like as a person? What methods and topics and activities are you actually attracted to and make you feel good about yourself and your learning? Because I think that's massively important and really, really underrated still in a lot of what we see in learning materials. And I think what's done in classrooms is that we don't factor in letting learners choose what they actually want to do, so that we get a better fit between them as people and their learning objectives, and actually getting them to stay motivated and stay inspired throughout their learning journeys.
Okay, I'll come back to that, but I'd like to just cross the bridge a little over to what you said about that, those defunct ideas about people being auditory learners, kinesthetic learners, and things like that. I'm going to try and link the two, because as you were describing it, my first thought was, but doesn't ourself as, do we not, whether we're auditory, kinesthetic, analytic learners, do we not then prefer materials or tools that reflect our learning styles. So, for example, if I was a visual learner, then maybe for me, everything with lots of pictures, all those YouTube videos, grammar explanations online in video format, wouldn't that be something that I like better? So my question is, surely those two things are linked, the choices I make and the type of, psychologically, the type of learner I am. Aren't they linked?
Yes and no, but I think the important thing is to realize that there isn't a physiological or a psychological or neurological reality to people having different types of brains, and that this is sort of fixed at birth and that this is the person we are. And I think that's the harm in the learning style theory that a lot of people still think is true. Is that, some people think, oh, I'm a visual learner, so I can never learn anything from audio only, or no, I'm an auditory learner, so it doesn't help me to look at pictures. This is just not true. It's scientifically not true. Actually, for all of us, it's helpful to have, multiple sort of sensory forms of input. But what is definitely true is that different people have different kinds of preferences. So does it come out to the same thing? I don't think so, because I think it's very, very important in any part of this to realize that it's about making choices. So, the fact, for example, that for you maybe it's beneficial to use lots of different colors in your learning materials. It's a choice that you make. It's a time that you choose to invest maybe in making your vocabulary notes, really beautiful with lots of different, I don't know, like having a color-coded system. This is because you love it and because it's going to help you show up for your learning habits, show up for your homework, show up for your learning goals, and not because this is what your brain requires. And I think it's an important thing because it gives us more of an idea of, we can design our own learning journey. We can be the authors of our own success here, and we're not limited by like the type of brain we have. And I think that's really important.
Okay. I really like
See
that.
what I mean?
I just feel totally guilty now because we started back at university 2 weeks ago, and there was me in the first week saying to all my students in all my classes, you need an exercise book, and I need you to have a pen, and I need you to take down these notes because you've got this exam, at the end of January. So there was me in effect. Now I'm going to put this out there in the world. There's me imposing my personal learning style onto my students. And now that you say it like that, right? So this thing with having a notebook where I write things in, I have, and I was so proud of this notebook. I was showing it to all my students and I was saying, look, I'm a teacher. I've been teaching 25 years and still for every class I teach, I have one notebook. I have my red pen, my blue pen, and my black pen. I was also proud of it. And it was just me saying, you've got to do this. Without actually, and I think the way you've described it, my rationale was really, this is a learning strategy. Not necessarily a language learning strategy. It's a strategy for any new thing that you learn. But this is a learning strategy. This is an effective learning strategy. And here you are, you're now telling me that different people have, used different cues, developed different strategies. But what I'm getting from you here is that people have got to find their own strategy.
Yes,
Is that
or at
right?
least,
Because my students, they all just lapped it up. They were
definitely.
like, ooh, get an exercise book.
Amazing. First of all, thank you for coming clean, Kanduk, about imposing a method on your students like that and sharing something from your own practice. I think it's something that we at some point have all been guilty of, me included. But I think there is an important element, and I mean, you can definitely recommend something that you know is a really powerful learning strategy, right? But then you can bring in the element of choice, making sure that your students choose something that's going to be really attractive for them. For example, when so vocabulary plays a very, very, very big role in my in my language coaching. So I think it's the part that I focus on. It's what I want to help people grow, because we need words if we want to express ourselves. So that's why my focus
Yeah.
is always on vocabulary. And I definitely have a process that I recommend, something called the gold list method, which a lot of you will be familiar with, and the rest of you can look up the gold list method. And this, together with another thing that I always recommend, which is write down full example sentences that are personal and specific to you. So this is something, let's just focus on the second one as an example, right? Like, so when you are trying to learn a new word or a new expression, you should write down a full, meaningful sentence that holds personal meaning for you. But I would give my learners the choice of, like, where are you going to write the sentence down? Do you want to buy a beautiful notebook for yourself? Now, me, I got excited when you were talking about the notebook and the 3 different colored pens. Like, this is what I live for, right? Like, I go through I go into like a cute stationery store and I start to salivate. This is me as a person. But not everybody has this reaction, right? Like, some people see paper and just get kind of triggered, maybe because paper is something that they've always associated with unsuccessful learning. We were just listening, sorry, but like in the news section, they were talking about handwriting versus typing, and how we just must allow also for the difference in the preferences that people have there. It's like some people really just don't like writing by hand, and that maybe getting these people to type, or even have the vocabulary list in their phones using an app, or just using a note system that they choose themselves, if it's something that they like, that they feel excited when they open this document or when they open this app, and when they have a positive reaction to it, I think it's more likely that they are going to show up for it over time. Then, for example, if you have a student who struggles to even bring a pen to class with them, they're not going to remember to carry that notebook around with them wherever they go. But they might be more successful if they have this vocabulary list in their phones, so I think it's always important to just let them choose. Even if you recommend a strategy, but then let them choose where they execute it.
You've given me a lot of food for thought there.
Well, I think
I'm
that's
just going
why
to have
we're
to
here,
rethink.
Kuttig.
I've got to rethink what I tell my students now in the first week of class. But a couple of things you mentioned, right? The student who struggles to bring a pen. Yes, I had that. I had that in the first week. I had this young man, about I think he was about 18, 19 years old, and I looked at him, and it's so different from decades ago when you come into class either as a learner yourself or as a teacher, and you see other people at the desk around you, and they've all taken out their pencil case and their notebooks and all, and so I have this student in my class, and everybody had something in front of them, even if it was a water bottle, and this student was just this student on his own. He had nothing. And I asked him, I don't know why I did. It must be me and my thing with the 3 pens and notebook, because I said to him, I said, "Where's your pen?" And he just looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" And then it just came out automatically. I said, "Do you not come to class with a pen?" And he had no reply. He just looked at me, and I just shook my head and walked away, and was thinking to myself, these kids these days. So that was the one thing. It was a rough first week. That was the one thing, and then
I love it. But at the so how did that student continue in the course? Did you ever see
he
them
had
learning
he
or
continued.
noting things
We're in
down,
our
or would
third
he
week.
just remember things just from hearing them?
Well, I mean, he somehow at some point during those 90 minutes, he whipped out his iPad, so he clearly did come to class with something. I just didn't see it. And that brings us back to what you were saying also about, having learners save their vocabulary, say, on their phone or something. And the verb you use was getting them to do something, getting them to save it on their phone, getting them to write it there. And I think for me, what I do is I get my students to make notes in a traditional paper, pen, notebook, right? And I think I may just need to rethink this, and instead of, for me, saying to myself in my reflection, this is what I'm getting students to do, I think I'm going to have to go one step further and say, I allow them to take notes. So I get them to take notes, but I would allow them to take notes and make notes in any way that suits their learning style. How about that? I think I've learned something from you today. Look at that.
That makes me really happy. I think it's important that we're flexible, because I think all of us, I believe, have had teachers in school, and I mean, school wasn't terrible and traumatic for everybody, but like I think everybody had some teachers that definitely were problematic in the sense that they said, like, oh, if you want to learn this, you have to do this, right? Like, and for example, like, you know, I remember my French teacher. She was a good teacher, but like she forced us to do the thing where you have you know, 2 rows of vocabulary, and then you 2 columns, and you cover one side, and then you remember the other word, and you said, you have to repeat it 7 times, and your brain needs exactly 7 repetitions. The thing was, like, for me, like, if I didn't have a whole sentence, if I didn't have a story and a reason of why I was learning some random piece of French vocabulary, like, it didn't matter if I was looking at it 27 times. I wasn't remembering it. Like, I hated this, you know, covering one side of the page and trying to remember this word. Like, if it was just the she was actually just making us use the list that was already in the book, and I didn't like doing it in the book. Like, I always wanted to do it in my own notebook. Like, I always wanted to write it down, and I had a very positive feeling about my notebook, but I didn't have a good feeling about this book. And so, like, you know, luckily for me, like, I found my own strategies of learning with language. But you know, a lot of our learners, like a lot of the people who come to me now for coaching, they were led to believe that they're simply bad at learning languages, so they have no talent for language, whatever that means, just because, you know, their teacher maybe was having them learn in a way that just didn't serve them, you know.
Because they weren't doing, sorry to interrupt, but because they weren't doing what the teacher wanted them to do, right?
Yes. And because the teacher thought, like, well, if you want to learn grammar, for example, there's exactly one way to do it, and it's sort of my way or the highway. And I think we know more now, don't we? We know more about that. People learn in very different ways, and people have different preferences. People have different needs, and if we can allow for some flexibility and, like, helping, guiding people. This is right, like, why I do coaching. You want to guide people to find a process that is helpful for them, so that they will be successful, rather than trying to impose your own, how you think everything should be done. And then, like, some people will just, like, fall by the wayside if it doesn't work for them, and they will leave school or leave the course thinking that they failed.
And they just...
I think in that case, it would be the teacher who failed that student, you know. And I know,
okay,
I want to make one thing clear, which is that I realize, like, I do one-to-one language coaching, which I realize is an extremely privileged context. I don't want to imply that, you know, school teachers who've got 30 kids in front of them, like, it's their responsibility to, you know, find an own individual learning journey for each of those kids. It's just not doable. Sorry if it sounded like that. That's not what I was saying, but I do believe advocating for flexibility and letting our students show us what they need is an important thing that we have to do.
I like what you said there with this advocating for flexibility. My son is in primary school. He's in elementary school, and he's got excellent teachers. Now, they've got 27 kids. He's in year 3 in primary school. And the kids know this. My son tells me that different groups of children get different types of homework. And when I look at the homework that they have to do, well, it's not called homework, it's called self-study, right? When I look at the work that they have to do during that self-study period in school, and the comments that individual students or individual kids get, I think that my son's teachers recognize this whole, personal learning style, right? And they've always said to me, so now with me and my notebook and 3 colored pens, so this will come as no surprise. I'm also a proponent of, if you've got homework for a particular day, then you jolly well do it and please finish it, right? And my son does struggle to finish his homework, not because it's difficult, but simply because he doesn't like it. I've noticed when it's interesting, he'll do it no problem. When it's tedious, in his opinion, he'll just do one and then he'll be like, yeah, well, I know it now. Why do I have to do the rest of it? And very often the feedback that we've got from his teacher was that, so here in Germany, for listeners who don't know, where we are, the kids get allocated 20 minutes per subject in primary 3 for self-study. So he's got 20 minutes that he's supposed to spend on math and 20 on German. And he doesn't always finish what's been allocated. But the teacher says he doesn't have to complete it. And my son will be very adamant about it. He'll come back and he'll say, no, my teacher says I don't have to do it. And I'm just absolutely baffled. But, and I think as teachers who work with these kids day in, day out, and now in their 3rd year, they'll know what, the child is capable of. They'll know what the child's limits are. And maybe really this is them expressing that flexibility. And maybe I've got to take a page out of their book as well.
Possible. And I think something that also really beautifully illustrates, I think, is the concept of maybe it's good enough. Your little son, like when he's done one of the exercises and he's got the feeling of like, yeah, well, like for me it's enough, I get it now. And like you come with a different mindset. You think like, well, but like you should do as much as possible. You should do the full homework. But I think it's important also when we're working with our learners, like it doesn't always have to be excellent. It doesn't always have to be perfect. Like whether it's in a school context or whether it's you've got a professional learner who's working on a presentation. Maybe the goal of like preparing for that presentation isn't always that they are going to give the best presentation ever, but the goal in the preparation will get you to the point where you feel like it's good enough that you can do it. And maybe it would be possible to go over it like 4 more times and take another week to prepare. Or maybe our goal should just be like, yeah, you know what, it's good enough. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. And that for me is very, very important. Like with all of my learners, I'm always checking in about like, it's like, how do you feel about your writing or about this text now? Like, do you want to go over it again or do you think it's good enough? And like a lot of the time they'll say like, no, it's fine. And they have another thing that they want to prioritize in that moment. And I think it's important to always like give the learner that autonomy to decide, where do they want to invest their time and their focus. And maybe the presentation is good enough now, and that leaves a little bit more time for, speaking practice or just, something else that will help them.
I like that. I like that because I think, right, in many cases, I'm not going to say all learners are like this, but now that you've mentioned it, I think in many cases people do something, or language learners or learners in general, they do something and they look at it, and you'll have the ones who will continue pushing themselves, who review their work and who'll say, oh no, that's not good enough for me, I want to do better. And then you'll have those who'll review their work and maybe they've spent, invested so much time, spent weeks, spent days, spent hours on it, where they've come to the point where they're just saying, no, I'm good with this now. I've had enough. I'm going to submit this. And again, that's a very personal thing. And who are we? I mean, on the one hand, as a teacher, I would like to say to my students, I know you can do better. Yeah, but actually, do I really know that they can do better?
Exactly. Like, and if we have time, like, I have a little anecdote that I think can really illustrate this very well as well, because when we think about, like, you can always improve, it can always be better, we're thinking along this sort of linear of, we can make your English better in this context, right? And for example, like, I work a lot with artists, and I remember, for example, last year I was helping somebody who had written, she's Danish, and she'd written a text, like an artistic text, a biographical text that she turned into this little zine, and it was a personal story of how she came into the punk community. Like, that was the text of
Okay.
the story. And she asked me to sort of proofread it for her. And I did, and I sent it back to her with feedback. And then we went through it together. And what we did then was we sort of negotiated where she was ready to accept my corrections and where she wanted to keep things as they were, because she had moments where she said, like, no, this doesn't sound like me anymore.
Right.
So, and I thought this was so important as well, because part of her English is that it's her English. And, sometimes the corrections I was offering were maybe too close to, what my English would be, or what, like, a sort of
Right.
standard English would be, but they weren't her English anymore. And it was important that we use her vocabulary and the way she would express it, even if it deviated a little bit from, like, notions of standard. And I thought that's so important. So for me, very often it's a negotiation as well. And I think this idea of, like, maybe it's good enough, it's correct enough, is really important as well.
So what we have essentially is this distinction between a teacher saying you can do better versus this text can be better, right? Because when I think of it now, and really this conversation has given me so much food for thought, I say to my students all the time, you can do better. Whereas I think essentially what I'm thinking is that work that you've given me can be better. I don't know necessarily if you can do better, honestly, because maybe you as a user, a non-native speaker of English, you're struggling with, certain prepositions, or you're lacking the vocabulary that you need to express the meanings you've been asked to express. So I'm making assumptions. I'm making assumptions based on what I'm able to do with my language, and that's a bit unfair.
Yeah, and thinking, of course, that the definition of better for them. Because for my client with this little punk zine, better wasn't more correct or more native type standard English. Her version of better was more poetic, more evocative, more authentic, more herself. Of course, in a way where it was still, understandable by other people, and it was still eloquent, and it was still beautiful language, because it was an artistic text that other people were meant to read. But, her version of better wasn't necessarily the same version of better that I had. And again, it's a question of context, whether you're able to sort of allow for that flexibility as well. But I think it's important always to also let the students, maybe whenever they can, tell us what it is that they want to improve, what it is that they want their text to be. Do you want the text to be clearer? Do you want it to be easier to understand? Do you want it to be more entertaining? Do you want it to be more smart? And then maybe we can tell them how they can make it better along those parameters, but not just this sort of umbrella term of, like, better. It's a question of what it would mean for them to be better. Maybe with your son, for example, like, maybe the texts he wants to write are funny. Maybe that's for him really important, that his texts are funny, and maybe that's not a priority that you have when you look at his homework or something.
Well, I mean, in his case, it's just simply writing the number 9, and he was happy with the way he'd written it, whereas, I wasn't. But I'd like to talk about language coaching next. I'm really interested in that, and I'm sure our listeners would be interested in hearing what the difference actually is between language teaching and language coaching. But first,
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online, and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Are you looking for lesson planning materials to kickstart the new term? We've got you covered. The Day is a global online resource that turns the news into lessons. We're offering listeners a free resource on Andrew Tate that you can find on thedaynews.co/Tate. Inspire personal development and critical thinking for your students by downloading the Tate Debate today and feel more confident addressing sensitive topics with your class. Visit thedaynews.co/Tate to find out more.
Okay, so coaching. Sarah, there are
Yes.
people who say coaching isn't a science. It's all wishy-washy. Teaching is the science. What do you say?
Yes. Ooh, wow, that's a big question. I'm not sure I want to get into the sort of philosophical front lines there. I always think definitions are helpful only in as far as they sort of serve us. I think some of us sometimes overthink labels like, oh, am I
Mm-hmm.
a language coach? Am I a trainer? Am I a teacher? So for me, yeah, what I do is coaching, but I'm definitely not offended when somebody calls me a teacher. And, even like vice versa. I definitely am also aware that coaching is very much a trend topic and that people are calling all sorts of things coaching, and maybe sometimes it looks like they want to call something coaching just so they can charge more money. But I think we've always had sort of charlatans and opportunists in
It's
in the
true.
world, and that's not new.
Yeah. Well, okay, so how about let's tweak this a little, or let me tweak my question. You coach, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Your students come to you with their
Mm-hmm.
language needs. What is
Mm-hmm.
it that you do with them that takes into account, as we were talking about here, their personal language learning style,
Mm-hmm.
their needs, and how would that be different from my standing in front of the classroom and telling my students, say, write better sentences, take out your 3 colored pens and your notebooks?
I think it's different in several ways. Probably the most striking one is that the relationship between the coach and the client is different in that, um, as a teacher, sometimes we go into the room very much as the person who symbolizes, I
Mm-hmm.
know exactly how to do everything, and I am here to show you how. Very often in a classroom, maybe you have a clear goal of passing an exam. Your students have to sit IELTS, for example, and you know
Mm-hmm.
exactly how to get them there. With coaching, especially also when you're working with professionals, like I don't really know the best way for, I don't know, this curator, for example, who's my client. Like, I don't know exactly what will actually make her presentations better. She has to tell me that. And then together, we are going to find out the best way for her to do that. And I will be offering my expertise and my experience and the tools I've learned.
Mm-hmm.
But she is going to fill all of that in. So, like a lot of what coaching is just asking the right question and then getting the client to decide the best way forward. And this has a lot of advantages because, earlier in the show we were talking about the problem of like sometimes getting your students to do something that you want to do, that you want them to
Right.
do, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
will be really beneficial for them. Well, in coaching, if they have chosen their own thing, so for example, if my client has says, yeah, every week I decide that I'm going to, I don't know, work through X pages of this book because this is what I feel is the most effective use of my time if I want to improve my vocabulary. And then I check in with them next week. So how's it going with the book? They are not accountable to me in the sense of, oh, I'm sorry, teacher, I didn't manage my homework. But they know that they are accountable to themselves. And they have then a very, very different sort of sense of possibility of reflecting why it didn't work, why maybe the goal
Mm-hmm.
they set was too high or too unrealistic, or maybe there was a different priority that week. And so the conversation about it and the way forward is very, very different. It's much, it's much more authored by the learner, you know. Does that make sense?
Mm. I like that. I like what you said there about the conversation. I think, right? Um,
Yeah.
I I'm gonna say that most of the people I know who do language coaching, they do it on a one-to-one basis, but sometimes you do it in small groups. But what you've got, right, is that you've got a
Mm-hmm.
conversation between you, the instructor. I'm going to use just a neutral term.
Mm-hmm.
You, the instructor, coming into conversation, coming into interaction with your audience and
Mm-hmm.
determining goals together. And
Mm-hmm.
this is not something that we have in the traditional classroom, because in the traditional classroom, from primary school right up to university, the goals are set in advance, either
Mm-hmm.
by the curriculum developer, the teacher, the school, or they've got exams that they're working for.
Sure.
So there's no conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And also what you said about the accountability, that they've set your learners, your clients have set
Mm-hmm.
those goals
Mm-hmm.
and they work towards that. And sometimes maybe they've come to that point in their learning dip and rise where they're in a dip, but they
Mm-hmm.
reflect on it and
Mm-hmm.
you review and see, where did it fail? What went wrong? So
Mm-hmm.
what you have also, I suppose, in that, in the work that you do in that sense, is that reflection, isn't it? That reflective learning, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the time and place in my curriculum to engage in that reflection.
No, but sometimes it's maybe as an example, like to sort of bridge between those very, very different contexts that I'm aware of, because I mean, I have also worked at universities and I've worked with groups of general learners. So I mean, I know other contexts beside one-to-one coaching as well. But always bringing in that element of choice. So, for example, let's say you're working on presentations in the classroom, right? Presentation skills. Rather than, like a top-down approach would be maybe giving them a phrase bank of like, these are good sentences that you can use in your presentation. I would say, I would tell the learners, however many they are, like for this week's homework, go out and find a TED talk or another kind of presentation online that you like, where you listen to the speaker and you listen to it and you think, this is what I want my English to be. This,
Mm-hmm.
how this person is explaining things, how this person is, using their voice, whatever thing that attracts you. This is my language model. And then
Mm-hmm.
go into their TED talk and write down, I don't know, 5 to 10 phrases that they hear, how this presenter is using signposting, for example, to get from one point to the next. They will be much more personally motivated, I think, to use those phrases that they learned than having the phrase bank that maybe you got from the book that you're teaching with. So I think you see what I mean. Like there are always possibilities um, to let the learner choose what they want their English to be and like what model they're striving toward, and then letting them collect the the things that they, like sort of knitting together this tapestry of what they want their English to be, because English is so many different things, right? And there are so many different models of how you can speak English. And I think getting them to choose, allowing them to see what it is that I find attractive, who do I like to listen to, whose voice do I like, how do I want to, shape my sentences, what metaphors do I want to use, and then allowing them to bring that into the classroom and share that with each other. I think that can be really powerful as well.
That's again, yeah, it's essentially also the learner making these choices for themselves. And like you said, it's empowering. It reminds me of something someone said to me about 20 years ago when I first started teaching English in Germany. I taught at Daimler Chrysler. It's now Mercedes. It was, back when they had the merger. And I was working with an American-based textbook, and there were all these idioms in there, and I don't remember, but specifically it was the idioms. And the manager, so I was teaching a group of managers, and he actually came up to me and he actually said to me, that's all very good. It's all really nice that it's in the textbook, but that language, that's not useful to us because we do a lot of business with customers in the Middle East. Now, that was back early 2000s. He said, we do a lot of work with people in the Middle East, and I actually need them to understand my English, and I'm not sure if that stuff in the textbook is going to be helpful. And you've just hit the nail there on the head.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's always the question, like, is this English going to help them be successful? Because maybe some of you also have these learners, like, well, we have some learners sometimes who are these idiom nerds, when they come to
Yeah.
class and they've learned a new idiom that week, and they're like, oh, he's blowing his own trumpet. And then, the 7 other people in the classroom will just look at this person and think, like, what the hell are you talking about? Because they just don't understand this idiom. And so this person is just kind of using this idiom in this
Or they've
vacuum
been taught in
of,
school that they've got to use idioms, right? And you have these people who come to class on a very wet and rainy day, and they go, Miss, it's raining cats and dogs. And you're
yes, of
trying to
course.
think, the last time you heard anybody say that.
Yeah, and for me, it's always like, yeah, of course, like use idioms until the cows come home if that's what you want to do, but learn. So, like, something that I really emphasize when I'm working with that kind of person is learn to paraphrase your idioms, please. Learn to check and read the room and see, are people understanding you, or is this a good opportunity to say, he's blowing his own trumpet. Sorry, do you know that expression? It means da 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 da. Do you have an expression in your language that means the same thing? And then this is a great conversation that you can have. So use idioms, but please paraphrase them would be my advice, for example. Yeah.
Before we finish, Sarah, one last question for you. Would you say that it takes a certain level of maturity for a person to find their own personal language learning style and for a person to be able to identify what kind of user of English they want to be?
No, I don't think so. I think it's never too early to think about what it is that you like, what it is that attracts you. I mean, it doesn't matter how early you go with kids, for example, you will definitely see some kids that are more into pens and other kids that are more into building blocks and letting them go crazy with either of those. And I think it doesn't matter if you have elementary school learners, anybody. You can always bring in this element of how do you like to learn. I know that I did it with my own English. Like when we started English, I mean, I'm not a native speaker of English. And when we started learning English in, it would be first year, I guess, in the UK school system. So I was like 10, 11 years old. And I was choosing my own methods. I had no idea what I was doing at the time, but I was just kind of inventing my own way of learning English that had nothing to do with what was going on in class. And
Look at you now.
Exactly, right? And so I think, yeah, no, it's never too early, because I was 10, I was 11, and I was kind of, teaching myself. And like one last piece of advice there, something that really, really changed the trajectory of my career, I think, was a few years ago at a conference, I heard Scott Thornbury talk about polyglots and what
Uh-huh.
we can learn from them as teachers. So polyglots, these people who speak many languages, not because they grew up speaking many languages, but because they learned them. So these, annoying people that you see their YouTube videos and they can say hello in 20 different languages and make the rest of us feel really bad about ourselves. But there is so much we can learn to these people, because if you read their blogs, for example, like how these polyglots have managed to learn all of these different languages, it has nothing to do with what we do in the ESL world. Like nothing really. The methodologies are completely different. These people are just complete pariahs, complete punks, just like making up their own systems, and I love it. It's so inspiring, and I've been like sort of borrowing lots of things from them and trying them out. For example, with my Italian, that basically started as an experiment because I wanted to use polyglot methods, and that's something I would really recommend. And yeah, share with your learners, show them a video of polyglots, discuss it, get them researching how different polyglots learn different languages, and see if they can find something that would work for them as a method. It's super inspiring.
I like that. Let's finish on that. Find something that will work for you, for them.
Yes.
I will no longer go into class with a notebook and 3 pens and tell my students they all have to do that. Thank you very much, Sarah. It's been lovely talking to you, and I'll catch up with you some other day. Thank you.
Thank you
for
so
being
much
with us.
for having me, Kuttig. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.